In today's world, we're witnessing wars and rumors of wars. Could you please explain to us what happened on October 7th, 2023?
On Saturday, October 7, 2023, a terrorist organization known as Hamas, who was a proxy of Iran, infiltrated Israel and massacred over 1,400 people, as well as abducting over 240.
So why did Hamas attack and why Israel?
From a biblical perspective, there are several reasons for this. One is that they hate the Jews. It comes from an old hatred from thousands of years ago. And the attack seemed like it was a test. It seemed like it was behind the scenes a test for something else that's coming, something bigger. And it also seemed like it was a huge distraction for that bigger thing that is coming. Many people right away recognized that something bigger was coming. And we know that Israel, as God promised to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were promised a land straight from the Euphrates River down to the Great Nile River, all the way up to Turkey and all the way down. That is the land that belongs to Israel. That is God's promised holy land to his chosen people. And 5, Satan hates God. He hates the fact that our Messiah, Jesus Christ, came through the Jews. And anybody who bears the image of God, he just already hates. He absolutely hates them, and he wants to try to destroy them. Because if he can destroy the Jews, everything else God has told us will happen. There won't be any meaning to it. And 6, it's a representation of God's covenant. Israel is a representation of God's everlasting covenant to us. And if he were to forsake the Jews, how can we trust that he won't forsake us either? So it's just these several reasons. All just stems from that old hatred.
So, as many of us know in Titus 1:2, we know that God cannot lie, and
Absolutely.
he won't lie. So why do so many believe that any of that history of Palestine or any of that land actually belongs to Palestine?
Again, there are several reasons, and many use these reasons to legitimize the Palestinians to have a right to massacre so many people, which nobody has that right. But Palestine actually has no ethnic background. They have no ethnic lineage, and they have no rights to the land because, first of all, the name Palestine was derived from the name Philistine. And the person who came up with that was the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who, during the time of the last revolt for the Jews to try to take back their land, he wanted to somehow cut them off for their land, make them lose all hope that they would ever regain it. And the name from the Philistines, we know that the Philistines were destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon when around the same time that he took captive the southern kingdom of Judea. So there's no ethnicity. They are a combination of Jews and Arabs and many other nationalities from everywhere else. But there has been no such thing as Palestine.
So why is it then that most nations won't support Israel during this?
Well, sadly, it's because they're ignorant and illiterate to true history and to what's really going on today. And it's just that old hatred again. It's always going to come back to that because of Satan himself. And some of these nations are most likely going to be part of what's really coming, which so many people aren't prepared for. But before I explain what that is, let me kind of give a brief summation of what some of these nations are. The Gaza Strip, as we know, is actually the ancient land of the Philistines, which we know of as Philistia. That whole coastal area is the general area where they were known to live. Lebanon is also home to Hezbollah and Hamas as well. And it was known for being the supplier for King Solomon when he built the first temple and many other structures. Even though it wasn't a nation of itself, it was like Yellowstone back then, where it was part of several places, but it was not a nation of itself. And 3, Iraq is modern day Assyria today. Assyria was known as the first empire that came against Israel, completely scattering the northern kingdom of Israel, and just the start of a long line of empires that unfortunately came against and ruled over Israel for centuries. In Syria, both Lebanon and Syria have already entered the fight. Though they haven't officially joined the war, they've already been firing at Israel ever since October 7th. And Syria also is known to border the area called the Golan Heights, which is known as ancient Bashan, which is where Moses destroyed King Og, who was the king of that area. It's the northern border of Israel. Israel has control and reign over the Golan Heights, and it is 50 miles from its capital, Damascus, which brings up the next point. Damascus is unfortunately what it seems like is the main hub for all of these nations, for all these proxies, to do a lot of shipping, a lot of moving around, a lot of communicating, a lot of coming together for several nations. And according to Isaiah 17, 1-3, in one day it will be destroyed, completely turned into a ruinous heap, never to be inhabited again. I suspect that could be a nuclear weapon. And from what's been going on, that the Hamas attack is basically a catalyst to that. Because we're seeing more and more activity with Damascus. And then that is going to be a catalyst to what is really coming, the bigger thing that's coming.
So what is coming next?
It's the Gog-Magog war.
And what is the Gog-Magog war?
As quickly as I can put it, the Gog-Magog war is many nations coming together as one massive army, and those nations are led by Russia, which its capital is Moscow, and another area called Tobolsk. Those are what's known as Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. And they lead many other nations, including Iran and Turkey and parts of Northern Africa and parts of Northeastern Africa, and even some of the nations around Israel, possibly some of the former USSR nations. And they're going to come against Israel, and they're going to invade them. And no other nation is going to do anything about it. Israel will be completely defenseless. And other nations, they're just going to verbally oppose them. That's it. And in that same day, though, however, we have, praise God, we have hope. He's going to come, Jesus, this is not the second coming, but he's going to cause a great earthquake and then send a massive confusion among this army. And they are going to turn against each other. Then there's going to be bloodshed and pestilence, and he's going to rain down on them a great flooding rain, hail, and fire of brimstone, which, by the way, is not nuclear weapons. That would contradict another promise God made to the Jews for a fruitful and prosperous land.
So fire and brimstone like Sodom and Gomorrah?
Exactly. Though we may not know what that looks like, we've got to remember the details we are given, which is raining down. So we need to be mindful of this.
What happens afterwards then when God sends his judgment on this satanic army?
First of all, we need to recognize that when this war happens and God sends his judgment on this army, it is going to be the greatest, mightiest act of God that we have seen in thousands of years. And this will bring about the next greatest revival the world will ever know in a way we've never seen. That means that all the nations around the world are going to acknowledge God. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to come to know Jesus. That's just not possible with what God is doing right now. But they're going to acknowledge him, And it's going to make people fall to their knees in tears and reverence and in fear, trembling like the Israelites did when they and Moses were at the foot of Mount Sinai. It's going to be that kind of trembling for the entire world. And a few things we need to keep in mind. This is not going to be around the time of the 7-year tribulation. Sorry. This is not going to be around the time of the 7-year tribulation. This is going to be way before. Because Israel will be able to cleanse the land and bury the bodies from this army for 7 months, and then they're going to be able to salvage and burn for fuel the weapons that are left behind. They're going to do that. They're going to be able to burn those for 7 years. And they're not going to be able to do that full 7 years during the 7-year tribulation, because in the middle of that tribulation period, they have to run for their lives. So for somehow, at least 3.5 years of that 7 years has to come before the tribulation period in order for them to be able to do that. And the most important thing that we need to remember is that this war does not bring about the Antichrist, because there are several verses in these 2 chapters of Ezekiel 38 and 39 that tell us that God will be acknowledged around the world. He won't share his glory with the most evil man in the world. In fact, he doesn't share his glory with anybody but Jesus. So we need to keep that in mind as well, which means it's going to happen before the rapture, way before the rapture. There's some time in between.
Thank you. Anything else you have?
We need to be prepared. This world needs to be prepared. Christians, we need to be prepared, but sadly the majority of the church, like 90%, they're not prepared. And if they don't listen to this message, it's not going to happen. They're not going to be ready. They're going to be just as shaken as the world. In fact, probably even more so. So we need to be ready. However that looks like, God will let us know. But we just need to be aware of this war, aware of what's going on, and stay true to the objective truth. And ultimately, God will be glorified.